What is Pippin and or Poppin' Kiddalushies coming back at you again for the first time. Today I'm going to be talking about the 10th edition Ad Mech Codex. The reason I'm doing this is twofold, really. First, I need this. That's the main thing. I need this. None of my friends who play the game are currently playing 40k because they're disillusioned with how 10th has turned out, and my friends who will listen to me don't know what the hell I'm talking about because they don't play 40k. So that's the main reason I'm doing this, is to get it off my chest. The secondary reason, I guess, would be that I haven't seen a concise place talking about the grievances around the Ad Mech Codex anywhere that isn't like a part of a greater video. And so I wanted to talk about mine and pretend that it's an original idea. That's really it. But it's mainly just to get this off my chest, because I bought the book so that I had a instantly mad button, and I need to justify that, really. I'm not going to be talking about individual data sheets because that gets into too much of the micro game that I don't have any real way to talk about the balance of. But I can talk about what we're seeing here, the detachment rules, the stratagems, and the enhancements, and how I feel about them with all of the Ad Mech rules, and why, for the most part, them to be underwhelming or just terrible, honestly.
Hey, I'm recording this way later, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say trans rights, because there are a lot of chud fuckers in this fandom, and I just don't want to deal with them at all, honestly. Anyways, yeah, trans rights, gay month is cool, and fuck off if you don't respect human beings at the most basic of levels.
So, like I said, I'm mainly going to be focusing on the detachment rules, enhancements, and stratagems. As for why I feel so negatively about the Ad Mech Codex, you've heard people whine about the datasheet changes ad nauseum. I agree. I think it's stupid and bad, but whatever. As much as I hope that they'll change in the alleged fixes that I have no hope for, we'll see. We'll really see. And we're going to start off with the army rule. One of the things that has been complained about ad nauseum because it doesn't affect your whole army, yada yada. That's going over stuff that we already know and is self-evidently stupid and bad. So I'm going to talk about why I think it's bad, that aside, which is the fact that I think it is overvalued and poorly balanced. Frankly put, assault is going to be better in 9 out of 10 scenarios because movement has higher value in this game than standing still. The only time you would ever choose heavy is if you are somehow holding your objectives turn 3 or turn 4, maybe. And then, honestly, the secondary effects about AP are so ridiculously niche that they almost never come up, and the overvalue on this comes from, I think, datasheet changes to Ad Mech, where it's, if they're at a 3-up naturally, then all of a sudden Protector Imperative making someone hit on a 2-up has a lot more value than going from 4s to 3s. Now, that wouldn't change in my opinion. People aren't going to choose it in 9 out of 10 situations. The point is that you are 9 times out of 10 going to choose Conqueror unless you somehow survive the meat grinder and are holding a point, and then you'll choose heavy. And in that case, its secondary effect of reducing AP in your deployment zone doesn't make any sense and is worthless. So of these two, Protector Imperative is a joke. You're not going to take it turn 1, you're not going to take it turn 2, you might take it turn 3 or 4, but it's very unlikely because your data sheets are so weak. So weak that it's hard to imagine holding an objective well enough to justify not moving on it. But more importantly than that, you're not going to choose it in part because its own abilities are at odds with itself. Heavy gives you a +1 to hit if you don't move. And if you're not moving for 95% of your army, they are going to be outside of your deployment zone, where that reduce AP by 1 in your deployment zone doesn't matter. And then Conqueror Imperative. The main thing about it is that it gives all your weapons assault. It has a niche but still pretty useful ability for gaining AP, something the army desperately needs. It's just better in most scenarios, is the main reason that I really dislike this army rule. Also, it doesn't affect most of our army, but whatever. That's beating a dead horse. And more than I think the secondary AP effects being niche and not really that like important or useful, I think that they're forgettable. And that is not something you want in your army rule. If I can't remember when I'm thinking about Doctrinas, they have a secondary effect like that, probably shouldn't be there. And then there's also the secondary thing of, frankly, I just like 9th edition's idea of Doctrinas more. I like the idea of maximizing your ability to do one thing and taking a hit somewhere else. I think that's a more interesting idea, and I think it's a better expression of Ad Mech's idea of optimization and player skill. So we're going to start off then with the Radzone Core, and I think it's a neat, fun detachment, something Ad Mech is really lacking on as far as I'm concerned. That being stated, it feels really bad that our fun, interesting detachment feels like a guard detachment and not an Ad Mech one. That being said, on the bright side, the detachment is better than it was in the index. That also being said, the book was definitely printed before the indexes were even launched, and so the index was made worse on purpose so that I would acknowledge that the book is better. The index being worse on purpose has really stuck with me in a way that I feel is necessary to bring up. And I think that it's emblematic of the Ad Mech Codex in a way, in that it feels really bad to know that for a just absolute fact, and just kind of adds to the shin kicks that this book has felt like, and this edition has doubly felt like for me. I think it's a very cool detachment, like I said. It's very, very guard flavored, more than Ad Mech flavored. But that's whatever. It's a fun detachment, and that matters more than its flavor, as far as I'm concerned. That being stated, I do have a massive problem with it. And this is a point that I'm stealing from someone else. I can't remember for the life of me who it was. Ad Mech is a technical army for a technical player. That is the fantasy of them. That being stated, this detachment puts the skill expression on the enemy player that you're against, not the Ad Mech player themselves. Because it gives your opponent the chance to decide on stuff about standing firm or taking cover. So next we're going to go over to the enhancements, starting off with Radial Suffusion. Increasing your rad bombardment range by 6 inches is insane in an auto include that you're always going to take. And then, honestly, the other two for stealth and sustained hits are kind of boring and not worth mentioning. And Anti-Infantry 2+ and Anti-Monster 4+ on a Tech Priest weapon is nice, but again, I don't really have a lot to say about it beyond it's neat to have, but not really a huge deal, I think. So starting off with the stratagems, I think a lot of these honestly are really unremarkable, even by the standards of the Ad Mech Codex. The one thing that I will give them is I like that they use the extra benefit when things are closer to Skitarii or other Battle 9 units. I think it's playing into an existing theme of the army, and more importantly, I think what the stratagems in this detachment do well, giving the extra benefit if a unit is close to a Battle Line unit for your Skitarii. Because as much as I hate it, and think it should be Tech Priest and not Skitarii that give out these buffs, it's playing into a part of the army that is already there and you're going to be doing anyways, and rewards you for doing it. And I really like that it's doing that. That being stated, Extinction Order is an abomination that I despise. It's incredibly constraining, low impact, and just frankly so self-evidently terrible to anyone who sees it. That I have a hard time conveying why it's bad beyond it just obviously is. So basically, I think Radzone Core is a fun Imperial Guard detachment that is incredibly strange in Ad Mech because it feels like some things are on theme. Even if I think it's such an obvious auto include, Radial Suffusion, that really plays to the detachment and what it's about. They double down on what exists in the Codex and in the detachment and do something with it. But then at the same time, you have really boring basic things, which isn't bad, but it's just disappointing, I guess. Where something like Lethal Dosage, giving weapons lethal hits, fucking Extinction Order, And then our two center enhancements here that give stealth and sustained hits. It all comes together to make a detachment that is like kind of fun for its detachment rule specifically, but very bland and guard themed outside of it. Next, we're moving on to Skitarii Hunter Cohort, which, while definitely not my most hated sub-faction in the book, it's the one I probably have the most beef with, and it's simply the fact that it is so insanely obviously the strongest of them that it sort of ends up necessitating a lot of things in the book be balanced around it in a way that I'm kind of frustrated by. But that being said, I think that's kind of an issue with 10th in general and how it's doing things, but whatever. So, why is it obviously the strongest sub-faction? First of all, giving your main battle line units and Iron Striders -1 to hit is really strong with stealth. And then the Sicarian thing is like niche, but nice for cover. That on its own, not an amazingly huge deal. It's strong, but not like game breaking. But it's once you layer on other things that I feel like it starts to like just be like, okay, like come on, man. Enhancements, starting off with Cantic Thrallnet, you give a unit both imperatives for a turn. It's honestly low impact just on the basis that Doctrinas are low impact, but it could be more impactful if they were better. Clandestine Infiltrator, forward deploying 6-inch pregame move is just a very strong thing to give a unit. And then, of course, Veiled Hunter, an ability type that is historically powerful. A 3 infantry unit redeploy is very strong historically. And then we have Battlesphere Uplink, the one I think I've seen the least of outside of Thrallnet, which is a move, shoot, move. Another historically strong ability type. So 2, maybe 3, depending on your opinions, are historically strong abilities that are all in one detachment. So we're already starting off very strongly on the Hunter cohort. So we then move on to stratagems, and a lot of them like are for Sicarian, Taraxi, and Sidonian and Iron Strider units. Starting off with a 5+ Feel No Pain access, which is, again, giving a unit a Feel No Pain for 1 CP is a very strong ability. Giving a +1 to wound against a unit that is outside of 6 inches of allied units, still considered a good, if slightly niche ability to give this sub-faction. We then go down here, giving 2 Skitarii units the ability to increase their AP. He is nice, because it's one of the things that Ad Mech is really lacking in. So having access to that is a good thing. Giving the Shroud Protocols a greater than 12-inch, no, you can't shoot me, is another strong ability. And then finally, at the bottom, we have another very strong ability with Advance and Charge to a Skitarii unit, which is, again, good. And then Program Withdrawal, removing 2 Sicarian or 1 infantry or mounted unit and then putting them in strategic reserves is a really strong ability to give an army. And all of these things, the 5+ Feel No Pain, the Advance and Charge, the remove and put things in reserves, the 3 unit redeploy, move, shoot, move, and functionally army-wide -1 to hit are all in one detachment. And that's why I kind of hate Hunter Cohort. It's a strong detachment that sort of necessitates that Sicarians, Skitarii, infantry, and Iron Striders all are balanced around it because of the strength level of the things in this sub-faction. And I think once Ad Mech gets properly fixed, should that ever actually happen, then that is going to become a lot more apparent than it has been so far. And this is already the most popular of the Ad Mech sub-factions to see as it stands. So that's sort of where my bone to pick with the Hunter cohort is. It's just self-evidently very strong, especially in comparison to a lot of the other sub-factions that we see. So next up, I'm going to be talking about the Data Psalm Conclave. And really, I think my problem with this detachment is that it really feels like you could have plucked out this detachment rule and put in the army rule. It affects the parts of the army that don't get Doctrinas and makes them nichely better in melee and like mid-close range shooting. Honestly, though, I think like where a lot of my issue with this detachment comes in is that it skews very heavily towards Electro Priests, which I do enjoy playing, but the Tech Priest focused sub-faction gives nothing to characters, which is what most tech priest things are. But it gives nothing to make characters better. Tech priests are, generally speaking, support pieces with mid-bad melee profiles and mid-bad guns. And this does nothing to rectify that, so it's entirely built upon Electro Priests and technically Cataphrons. But doesn't really feel like there's support for Cataphrons either, beyond the detachment rule. So this just ends up feeling like not the Tech Priest or Cult Mechanicus sub-faction, it feels like the Electro Priest sub-faction to me because of all that. It leaves kind of a sour taste in my mouth because the Ad Mech Codex has 5 detachments. This one skews heavily towards Electro Priests, and we have a second one that is specifically for Castellan robots. And then on top of that, we have Rad Bombardment, which feels very guard to me still. So it kind of turns out with what it feels like is the Ad Mech Codex has 2 specific unit sub-factions, 2 general sub-factions, and a guard sub-faction. And that ends up sort of leaving a sour taste in my mouth in regards to it. And it's made worse by those 2 specific unit sub-factions are things that feel like they should just be part of our default rules to begin with. So, starting off then, we're going to go into the enhancements. I think, honestly, the benedictions are nice, but feel unimpactful from what little I've played with them. Maybe this is just a thing that is better in the hands of a better player than me, and I just am not like good at positioning enough to make it consistently useful. So then going into the enhancements, Mechanicus Locum, once per game you get to just remove Battle Shock, which is fine, but Leadership is bad, so you'll never take it, even if it's 5 points. Mantle of the Gnostic, I think it's good, but like bland. Auto Sermon. So this one I don't get. The other, give units both of your Doctrina's abilities, is a stratagem or it is every turn. The problem with this is that it's once per battle, which isn't great. I just don't understand why this is the only one of these that is a once per battle ability. If that's the case, it feels like it should be a stratagem instead. Tempora Corpia, giving it fights first to a unit is nice. So we then get on to stratagems. Giving Cult Mechanicus a 4-up Feel No Pain against Mortals is nice, but Mortals are so niche in this edition that it doesn't feel as impactful as it has in the past, but it's still a good thing to have as a like pocket pick. Adding one to a melee wound roll from a Fist is nice. A 4-up Fight on Death is very nice. Giving a Cult Mechanicus model a 4-up Invuln save is very nice. So, Tribute of Emphatic Veneration really feels like Extinction Order 2. Take a Battle Shock test and then if you fail, you take a -1 to hit. Cool. I am never using that. I have 5 stratagems in this detachment. Get rid of Tribute of the Emphatic Veneration and make Data Blessed Auto Sermon a stratagem instead. It's just going to make the sub-faction better as a whole. And then Litany of the Electromancer on a D6, gives something mortal wounds. It's a, like, find a pretty bad mortal bomb for Electro Priests, but, like, I could see it having very niche uses. And I think that, like, that sentiment, it's fine but bad, really does kind of encapsulate my feelings on Data Psalm. Nothing in here is offensively bad, which I don't hate Data Psalm Conclave, but I'm not excited to play a Tech Priest army because of it. Next up, we have the Explorator Maniple, which I think is probably my favorite of the detachments in this book. The reason for that being very simple, I feel like it's the one that commits the most to its identity and idea, even if I'm not in love with its idea. Being able to mark an objective marker every round, and then getting benefits if you are either on that or targeting things on that, is a really good and cool and Ad Mech themed idea. It was part of our secondaries as a last edition, which I really loved, and I was glad to see something like that come back in this edition. That being stated, the reroll 1 of wounds is good. It is a very good ability, but it honestly, to me, just ends up kind of feeling like a worse Oath of moment, which isn't fair at all, especially since Oath is around hits now, but it just ends up feeling that way. It is good, but it doesn't feel as good as other things in the greater context of the game to me, which isn't fair, But I do like it, and I especially like that they actually thought about, hey, you have a marked objective marker. What if you're on it? Because frankly, good job 40k rules team. I didn't expect you to consider that, and I'm so happy that you did. Moving on to the enhancements, I want to make a point of saying that these enhancements are all built around your detachment rule. I really like that. Get CP on a 4-up is really nice if you're on objective marker. A 4-up invuln for marked units on an objective marker. Add 1 to hit roll if you're on an objective marker. Auto make a roll a 6 when you're on an objective marker. I like these things. I think they're really cool. And I really like that the detachment plays into its own theming and ideas. I do, however, wish that we got a more generalized version of them to a certain degree. I wish that we had a version where it was a slightly worse effect if you were not on the objective marker. Maybe not for all of them, like for Artisan, the auto make a roll a 6, or the +1 to hit. I think those are fine as is. But something like, maybe for Magos, when you're off an objective marker, you gain CP on a 5 or 6+, but if you're on an objective, you gain it on the 4. Stuff like that. I kind of wish we got a little more granular with it, but it's not bad in its current form. This is a nitpick, wanting a little more in the thing I already like. And then we go down to stratagems. Starting off with the 1 CP sticky objectives on a dying unit is pretty nice. Objective marker focused detachment. A 6-inch consolidation on an objective marker is nice. Info Slave School, making a second objective marker to be marked for your sub-faction role, is really cool, and I really like that. It might be too good, honestly, and very spammable after turn 1 or 2. I think it and Reactive Safeguard are kind of the things that in this detachment you're going to spam the most. Re-embarking in a transport is just an insanely strong ability, even if it is based around being the subject of a charge, but that can still add up to 3 inches to a charge, which is really good. Instance Exhaust being centered around the smoke keyword is pretty bad, just because smoke feels like a worthless rule that I think the game would be better off without, but whatever. And then Retrieval being you disembark a unit from a transport and they get a +1 to wound while targeting a unit that is on an objective is going to be your game plan, which I fully understand. That being stated, this still feels incredibly restrictive. That being stated, it still feels incredibly restrictive and niche for a 2 CP stratagem. 1 CP, I would probably have better feelings on it. So overall, like I said, Explorator Maniple is my favorite of these sub-factions. It has a thing that feels very Ad Mech and feels pretty good to use. It has enhancements that fully commit to its niche and its idea, and its stratagems largely do the same thing while also giving it additional benefits to things that you are already going to be using. And from the best, we get right into the worst with the Cybernetica cohort. The Castellans get your army rule sub-faction. Good job for being 2 steps away from realizing that it was a mistake in the first place. It really does feel like a waste of a detachment rule in a way that genuinely frustrates me. It's just insulting that we have a sub-faction, it gives one of your units your army rule, and your army rule isn't that great to begin with, so it just kind of feels like a double insult to me, honestly. Anything in the Ad Mech book is not going to have Doctrinas. It's going to be Castellans, just because they're the closest thing Ad Mech has to a mercenary style unit in the lore. It's still insulting that they didn't get Doctrinas, and then they decided that a sub-faction should be based around that. And then, on top of this, this is supposedly the motor pool sub-faction. On top of the feeling of being insulting to see this, honestly, it's another instance of, if Doctrinas are really important to the army, which they don't feel like it right now, it means that Castellans, a unit that most people like and just want to include in their armies for fun, are now forever priced around this sub-faction. And it feels bad. But again, a 10th edition issue as a whole. And honestly, the part of this that really grinds my gears the most is that this is the motor pool sub-faction, which sucks because I was really hoping for something interesting that played into the idea of vehicles. For me personally, because that's one of my favorite ways to play Ad Mech, and to not really have that in this edition, or last, if we're being honest, really kind of sucks. So, going into the enhancements, we actually start off pretty positive. Necro Mechanic, a tech priest being able to choose a vehicle within 12 and setting the damage it takes to a 0 is really nice, and I like that a lot. That's really good for a vehicle sub-faction. Lord of Machines is the best instance of a leadership test use in this entire book, which is shocking, but it is niche on the basis of it has to be a vehicle within 12 inches. So sometimes, like if you're fighting Tyranids, it just won't be useful, but kind of fun, and so I kind of like it. It factors in not working as well as you'd hope, which I am fine with. Emotionless Clarity, Auto Explode, Deadly Demise is another instance where it's like, it's not super impactful because everything that has Deadly Demise in the book that I can think of are Deadly Demise 1. But auto-exploding vehicles within 12 is like kind of funny. Arch Negator just feels kind of bland, and I would like to see something a little more exciting. So moving on to stratagems. A weird thing to notice, first and foremost, is that every stratagem in here expressly states Legio Cybernetica, except for Motive Imperative up here. And I don't know why, because Castellans are still labeled vehicles under the Ad Mech Codex, so I don't know why the distinction is being made here. But whatever. Adding 3 inches to movement and a +1 to advance and charge rolls is pretty good. It will only ever be used on Castellans with fists, whether that be single or double. Motive Imperative is great, honestly. We then next up go down to Divinatory Targeting. Make a unit +3 ballistic skill and ignore cover, but only if they're targeting stuff on an objective marker. This is so strange to me just because it feels like an Explorator mana pool stratagem. Why is this in this detachment? It doesn't feel like it fit. Machine Spirit Resurgent, rerolling hit rolls and wound rolls if below half strength is very good, genuinely. It does have the issue of like the half strength rules are really weird a lot of the time, but it's still a good stratagem as a whole. Benevolence of the Omnissiah, giving a 6-up Feel No Pain and 5-up against mortals, is nice and good for a vehicle sub-faction. Cogitation, giving a unit both imperatives, is fine, but you're rarely going to have a need for 3 of your 4 effects to take place at any specific time. I get why it's here in the give your Castellans your army rule, but I'm not like huge on it just because it's so meh. Shoot and fall back in a vehicle sub-faction. Good job. That's a really good thing to have. I really like it, actually. So Cybernetica has the problem of it feels like it's supposed to be your fun Castellan sub-faction. Of fuck it, we're going all in on making Castellans really funny and good to use. And then it really doesn't commit to making Castellans that, but it also doesn't feel like it really commits to making your vehicles really good and interesting, because everything is so dependent upon your stratagems to give you an identity in this sub-faction. It really feels like, because your detachment rule feels like it should just be default. 2 of your 4 abilities are pretty funny but not good. 1 is bland, and then 1 is a really good vehicle thing. So a lot of your flavor ends up being locked behind your stratagems. And so it ends up, to me, just feeling like a lot of the Cybernetica is entirely dependent on its stratagems to have a identity to it, which is bad because your sub-faction is your identity now. That's just how 10th is. And this one having its identity locked behind its stratagems feels really bad, and I just kind of hate it. It feels a lot like playing the Death Guard's initial index, where they didn't have anything to differentiate. That's what this ended up feeling like to me when I was playing it. So to end with a wrap-up, this is a thing that I made before the Custodes book got released, and even if their book's bad, I was right, baby. So, at the end of the day, I think this book really is a mess. It just kind of ends up feeling weird and like a mess. And especially when Ad Mech is lacking, in my opinion, a sub-factions that are truly focused on things like tech priest characters and vehicles. As far as the changes that are going to be coming up, I don't have a lot of hope. I think that the way this book is written, it would need to be burned down to the ground and restarted in order to make it something fun. And that's really the core factor here. Ad Mech isn't fun right now, and it hasn't been this whole edition. I think GW can make the book better. That's not hard. I think it can be fixed. The real question is, will these fixes make the book fun? And I have very, very low expectations for it. And I really feel like a lot of Ad Mech players are the same. No hope for this book to be fixed in a way that is satisfying and fun to play. That being said, we are, of course, B-Ragers, and then there are just a bunch of weird decisions as well in the book. I think the biggest one is making your elite units buffs centered around Skitarii makes no sense to me from a lore or gameplay standpoint. I think if you change that to be centered around tech priests, it makes a lot more sense and becomes easier to work with. There's just so many weird, bad decisions that I really just dislike about this book. And like I said before, it really does feel like Ad Mech has two truly Ad Mech detachments right now. And those two really are Hunter Cohort and Explorator. And Hunter Cohort is just kind of feels more generic to me than anything. Everything else does feel like Ad Mech, but that's because it feels like it should just be a part of the main book. And it's just frustrating at the end of the day. Because I love this faction, I love this army, and it really sucks, because especially from how I feel about it, because 10th edition really has burned me 3 times. When the indexes got revealed, I was playing Death Guard and Ad Mech, and both of those indexes were terrible. Death Guards was so bad that I was excited when I saw Ad Mechs, and thought it was pretty good, actually, because it had something, at least some character, and then I've been burned again by this book. And just how bad it is, and how it's not seeing changes. And it's left me in a spot where I don't want to play 10th edition, because myself and a lot of others have been getting repeatedly burned by this edition. With the true exception so far of Orcs and Chaos Space Marine players, who've gotten a really good deal compared to everybody else, it feels like. But yeah, that's how I feel about my greater issues with each Adeptus Mechanicus detachments and its overall army rule. Thank you for watching, and I might do this again in the future. I might not. We'll see.
So, minor secondary addendum, I have learned that the data slate, or the Ad Mech update, is supposedly coming out in the next week or two, which, if that is the case, I might do a live recording type of deal of my initial thoughts on it. And I apologize for any audio hiccups. I am learning a new editing software in DaVinci because I couldn't get Premiere Pro to download, and then I am also trying to figure out how OBS works and how best to set up a microphone without any professional soundproofing. Like I said, though, genuinely, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and have a good rest of your day.